Good evening. Before anything else, I need to say this clearly, slowly, and more than once so it sinks in wherever you are listening. This is a story. It is not real. There is no world war right now, no missiles in the air, no nuclear explosions on any horizon you can see. Any resemblance to real people, real countries, real events is coincidence or imagination. You are safe. You are hearing a fictional broadcast. Having said that, I am going to talk to you as if the worst day in modern history has already started. My name is Daniel Hart. For most of my career, I was a news anchor, the calm face you saw between commercials and weather reports, telling you what other people had done. I used to sit in a bright studio with polished floors and glass walls and a crew of 15 behind cameras, lights, and teleprompters. Tonight, I am in a concrete room that smells like dust and hot cables. There is no camera, no desk, no teleprompter. Just a microphone, 3 tired colleagues, and an old analog clock on the wall whose second hand sounds far too loud in the silence between words. If you are hearing my voice, it means at least 3 things are still working wherever you are. First, there is still electricity somewhere between this bunker and your ears. Second, at least one broadcasting tower is still standing, its metal frame not yet twisted by heat or shock. Third, you are still alive and listening. That is enough for now. The program you are tuned to used to be called Central News Now. Management has given it a new, unofficial name on the paperwork that still exists, Nuclear Apocalypse Radio. Someone else on the team prefers Doomsday Radio. Our engineer crossed both out on a notepad and wrote Survival Broadcast in big block letters. Call it whatever you like. It is a voice in the dark. Tonight, in this fictional world we are imagining together, the headlines that used to scroll quietly along the bottom of screens have broken loose and set the sky on fire. It did not happen all at once. It never does. For weeks the warnings had been there, in diplomatic language and jittery markets, in grainy satellite photos and increasingly aggressive press conferences. A carrier group redirected here, a missile test there, a joint exercise announced on one border, then another. Commentators used phrases like rising tensions, and war of words, and brinkmanship. The kind of phrases that sound serious until you realize people have been using them for decades without anything truly irreversible happening. Then, in the early hours of what will be remembered as Day Zero, something new appeared on the monitors in a quiet building you and I will never see. A spike in radiation measured high above a contested region. A flash on infrared satellite feeds that did not look like a storm, did not look like a fuel explosion, did not look like anything except the thing it most resembled, and everyone in that room had prayed never to see. A small sun blooming where no sun belonged. The official phrase was possible low-yield nuclear event, a phrase designed to anesthetize. The word that went through the minds of the people actually watching, the people who had spent their adult lives running doomsday simulations on old computers in windowless rooms, was simpler. Nuclear. If this were a normal broadcast, at this point I would be joined by correspondents and analysts. Their faces would appear in little squares on the screen. Their voices would cut in and out as they stood in front of famous buildings and told us what spokespeople were saying. Tonight there are no faces on the screen, just the needle of the signal meter twitching above my head. I am the only voice you will hear. If I mention a leader or an expert or a frightened teacher in a school classroom, you will only hear them through me. One throat, one voice, one channel. So let me tell you what possible low-yield nuclear event looked like from the other side of the world before the sirens and the orders and the panic. Imagine you are a history teacher in a small city in the middle of a continent. You have spent the week explaining duck and cover drills from the 20th century to students who think nuclear war is an aesthetic for video games and retro posters, not something that could ever fit into a real calendar. Your students laugh when you show them black and white film of children hiding under desks. They make jokes about radiation filters on social media. You smile, but somewhere in the back of your mind, a tiny door marked what if creaks open. On the morning of Day Zero, your phone vibrates twice while you are erasing notes from the whiteboard. 2 news alerts. One from a network like this one from an app that specializes in rumors and disasters. Both use the same phrase. Unconfirmed report of nuclear detonation near forward operating base overseas. You stare at the screen long enough for a student to ask if you are okay. You say yes. You are lying, but you do not yet know how big the lie is. You put the phone face down. You do not tell the class what you have just read. There is still a chance it is wrong, and you do not want to be the person who introduces that word, nuclear, into their morning if you do not have to. That was 8 hours ago, in our story. Since then, confirmation has come in layers, like ash settling on a landscape. First, the radiation data from independent monitoring stations in neutral countries. Numbers that do not lie, even when governments do. Then, satellite imagery posted anonymously by someone in an intelligence agency who could not stand to wait for official statements. The grainy outline of a mushroom cloud rising over a sparsely populated region. The caption, "This is real." Then, finally, leaders at podiums. One after another, they went on the air from behind heavy wooden lecterns and long flags, faces pale, lips carefully forming words that would be remembered. They called it an outrage, a tragedy, an escalation. They each insisted they were not the ones who had pressed the button. Every government blamed another. Every government said it still wanted peace. When the first wave of speeches was over, there was a brief moment, 90 minutes, perhaps 2 hours, when the world balanced on the tiniest of edges. It might still have ended there. One tactical weapon, condemned, mourned, boxed in as an aberration, a mistake. It did not end there. Someone, somewhere, decided that to do nothing would be weakness. Someone else decided that the first someone was probably lying. War planners who had spent their lives in the shadow of the doctrine called mutually assured destruction took their binders off the shelf and flipped to the pages marked limited options, the ones with small maps and small circles and small numbers next to casualty estimates. The word limited is doing a lot of work in this story. It is the same word you will hear in every official sentence for as long as those sentences exist. Limited exchange, limited strike, limited theater. When you are the dot at the center of the circle, there is nothing limited about it. Right now, as I speak into this microphone in our imagined world, air crews are strapping themselves into bombers they trained to fly, but never thought would actually leave the runway with live payloads. Submarine commanders are opening safes that have not been touched in decades, taking out envelopes with codes and phrases and targets that were written by people who are now long dead. In the skies high above, satellites that were launched for weather and communications and navigation are being repurposed as eyes for war. In cities that have not yet been touched, people are still going to work, still making dinner, still arguing with loved ones about small things. But every single one of them is doing those things with a part of their mind listening for a sound they have never heard and yet somehow recognize. Sirens. Let us talk about sirens. In our fictional world, most countries still have them. They have been used for storms, for earthquakes, for civil alerts. They are tested once a month, once a year. People complain about the noise, check their watches, go back to what they were doing. Everyone says they are outdated relics from the Cold War. Tonight, they are not relics. They are the instrument that divides before from after. If you are listening to this broadcast in our imaginary future, I want you to picture where you would go if you heard that sound. Not the test tone, not the gentle chime of a phone notification. The long, rising howl of a siren that means something is coming and you cannot stop it. Do you know where you would run? Do you know who you would call? Do you know which door you would close and refuse to open again? Most people in our story did not. There were preparedness guides, of course. Government websites explaining how to build an emergency kit, how to find the most protected part of a building, how to shelter for 48 hours against fallout. They were read mostly by the same people who read all preparedness guides. The ones other people jokingly called paranoid until the first flash. Paranoia is just realism delivered too early. I am going to do something now that I never did in all my years as a conventional news anchor. I am going to give you direct instructions. Remember, this is fiction. You are not in danger. But I want your imagination to practice the motions, because one of the oldest purposes of stories is rehearsal. If, in this imagined world, you were sitting at home and you heard a siren that was not scheduled, and your television and phone both lit up with the same words, "Ballistic missiles detected." This is not a test. Here is what you would do. You would not go to the window. You would not run into the street to see. You would not get in your car to try to drive out of the city you should have left yesterday. You would move inward and downward. Basement if you have one. If not, the lowest floor, the most central corridor, the room with the fewest windows and the heaviest surrounding walls. You would grab water if it is within reach. Food if it is near. Batteries if they are on the way. You would not spend precious seconds searching for one specific item you suddenly feel you cannot live without. You would call out to anyone in the home with you. You would knock on the nearest door if you had time on your way past. Shelter now, you would say. No explanation. No debate. You would close the door behind you. You would wait. In our story, some people never get that chance. They are too close to the first targets. Military installations, command centers, strategic ports. Whole neighborhoods, whole districts, gone in one blast, reduced to heat and pressure and fragments. If stories were fair, we would skip them entirely, because there is no lesson in those deaths beyond the one carved into stone long ago, that human beings built devices capable of doing this and called it security. But stories are not fair, and so we acknowledge them briefly, in a moment of silence that I will mark now. For the rest, for the millions who are not at ground zero, there is the waiting, and the listening. That is where I come in. In this imaginary world, our station was once part of a news network. It is now part of an emergency broadcast system that stretches like a frayed net across a damaged continent. Some stations have already gone dark. Others are running automated loops, their human staff gone to find their own shelters. A few, like ours, still have someone live at the microphone. We are the ones who will talk you through the next hour, the next day, the next week, until our voices are replaced by another loop or by silence. I have spent my life training to sound calm even when the words I read are anything but. Tonight, I am going to use every bit of that training, not to deceive you, but to hold a shape around the fear so it does not expand and fill every corner of your thoughts. I will tell you what is known, what is not, and what you can still do. First, what is known. In our story, there has been at least one confirmed nuclear detonation on a battlefield far from most major cities. There have been alerts from early warning systems indicating that more missiles may have left their silos or their submarine tubes, their trajectories not yet confirmed. Leaders have gone to bunkers. Chains of command have shortened. There are fewer people left in the room where the big decisions are made, and those who remain are more frightened than they will ever admit. Second, what is not known. We do not yet know which cities, if any, have been targeted directly. We do not yet know whether the missiles currently in the air, if there are any, will be intercepted, will malfunction, will fail to reach their targets, or will arrive on time and on course. We do not yet know how far other governments will go in retaliation, or whether cooler heads will find a way to stop the cascade before every plan in every binder is executed. There is a temptation, in the face of not knowing, to fill the gaps with the worst possible answers, to assume every rumor is true, to believe every blurred image, every panicked post, every anonymous voice on an unverified channel. That temptation is as dangerous as any warhead. So here's the third category. What you can still do. You can decide that, in this fictional world where the people above you have lit fires in the sky, you will not light smaller ones inside your own neighborhood. You can decide not to empty the shelves of your local store alone in the middle of the night, leaving nothing for the families that arrive after you. You can decide that if you already have enough water to last a few days, you will leave the extra for those who do not. You can decide to share information carefully, repeating only what you know comes from verified alerts, not what your cousin's neighbor's friend claims to have seen on a dashboard you cannot see. You can decide to look for the most vulnerable person around you and ask, "Do you have somewhere to go if the siren sounds?" You can decide to be the one who stays calm long enough to help someone else find the stairs. In a world where missiles move at thousands of miles per hour and decisions in sealed rooms can erase entire skylines, these small choices might seem meaningless. They are not. The big levers are out of your hands. The small ones are not. In the next parts of this long, imagined broadcast, we will follow this world as it tips further into darkness. We will hear, through my single voice, from people taking shelter in subway tunnels, from farmers watching strange dust settle on their fields, from soldiers in bunkers they never expected to use, from children asking questions their parents do not know how to answer. For now, we are still in the moment before the first city falls, before sirens turn from theory to pain, before people who always thought the end of the world would be quick discover that it is, instead, a long process of systems failing one by one. You and I are standing on that edge together, in imagination. We have the luxury, in this safe real world where you sit with your headphones, or your phone, or your old radio on the kitchen counter, of stepping back from that edge whenever it becomes too much. The people in our story do not. So, for their sake, for the sake of the rehearsal, stay with me a little longer. Picture the map you carry in your head of the world. The one with borders and capitals and flight routes, with cities you have never visited but know by name, with oceans you have flown over while watching movies and half sleeping in narrow seats. Now imagine certain points on that map glowing faintly. Not destroyed yet, just at risk. Your city might be one of them. It might not. Either way, the smoke from those that do burn will not respect the lines drawn on maps. That is how nuclear fire works. That is how consequences work. In the next segment, when you and I return to this fictional broadcast, the edge will have been crossed. At least one city will have gone dark. Sirens will have had their say. The word after will mean something new. Until then, take a breath in the world that is still intact. Look around the room you are in. Find the walls, the doors, the people. Remember that this is a story. Remember that you are safe. Then, when you are ready, join me again in the world where everything you have just taken for granted has been called into question by one flash on a faraway horizon. Before I close this first chapter, I want you to picture one more scene in this imaginary world, the way pilots rehearse checklists on clear days. Somewhere in one of those at-risk cities, a man is sitting in a small apartment, watching the news with the volume turned low. He has 2 children asleep in the next room and a mug of coffee that has gone cold without him noticing. He is not a prepper, not a survivalist, just another person who always assumed there would be more time. The banner on his screen keeps crawling the same line. Leaders urge calm. Public advised to review emergency procedures. He thinks, if it were really bad, they would say more. Then he looks toward the bedroom door and thinks, if I'm wrong, I don't get a second chance. So he stands up, not because he is certain disaster is coming, but because he would rather feel slightly foolish in the morning than helpless in the night. He fills the bathtub, telling himself it is just in case the water goes out for a while. He finds a backpack and drops a few things into it. A small first aid kit, a flashlight, a radio, a notebook and pen, a printed photo of his family in case batteries fail and screens die. Nothing dramatic, just objects he would rather not be searching for in a hallway full of smoke. Then he opens his front door and knocks on the one across from his. When his neighbor answers, puzzled, he does not launch into a speech about geopolitics. He simply asks, if something bad happened tonight, do you have a room inside this building that's away from windows? Somewhere we could wait it out. There is a pause, then a nod. We have a storage closet under the stairs, she says. It's a mess, but we could clear it. So they clear it. They move boxes and bicycles and old paint cans, coughing at the dust, making room where there was none. They do not call it a shelter. They do not call it a bunker. They just make a space where, if the siren ever sounds, 2 families will not have to argue in the hallway about what to do. They have already decided. That is what stories are for. They let us decide, in safety, what kind of person we hope we would be when the stakes are higher than we can truly imagine. Your nervous system is not great with statistics. It is very good with pictures. If I tell you there is a 1% chance of catastrophe in your lifetime, your eyes glaze over. If I tell you a story about a man knocking on his neighbor's door and making space in a dusty closet, your mind builds it like a little stage set. Later, if real sirens ever wail in your real city, that stage set might still be there. You might find your feet moving toward a neighbor's door instead of toward the window. I do not tell you this to frighten you. I tell you because even an imaginary rehearsal is better than none at all. This, then, truly is the end of the last quiet evening in our invented world. From here on, in parts 2, 3, and 4, the war will stop being a headline and start being a pressure wave, a flash, a taste of metal in the back of the throat. Advice will shift from prepare to endure. Maps will change. Skylines will not. But you, in the intact world where this audio plays, can set the story down whenever you wish. You can walk outside. You can look at a sky that owes nothing to anyone's launch codes. And if you ever hear someone joke nervously about fallout or sirens, you will have one more story in your pocket instead of just a statistic. So I will end part 1 as I would end a real emergency bulletin, with words that work in fiction and reality alike. Stay calm. Stay aware. Know where you would go. Know who you would go with. And remember, above all, that for you this is a rehearsal made of words, not a warning made of sirens. I am Daniel Hart. We will pick up the story on the other side of the first flash. Good evening again. Before we step back into this world, I have to repeat one thing, clearly. This is still a story. No missiles are flying above you as you listen. No sirens outside your window are because of anything I am about to describe. We are imagining a worst-case night together from the safety of reality. Hold on to that. Now, back to the place where we left off. I told you we would meet again on the far side of the first flash. In our story, that flash does not happen in your sky first. It happens far away, over a city that most people could not find on a map, even though they know its name. And yet, as with all things in a connected world, its destruction arrives in your living room almost instantly. It starts not with light, but with a tone, a sound every broadcaster dreads, because it means our words are about to be replaced. In the studio where I sit in this imagined future, halfway through a sentence about international condemnation and ongoing efforts to de-escalate, every monitor on the wall freezes. The ticker at the bottom of the screen stops crawling. The control room window, once full of tiny movements and hand signals, goes still. On the console in front of me, a small red light that has never been more than a test indicator starts flashing steadily. Emergency alert override. Our engineer swears softly under his breath. The producer lifts both hands, signaling, keep reading until it hits. You do not hear the confusion. You only hear me pause for a fraction of a heartbeat, then continue as if my throat did not just go dry. Then the tone comes. A rising, falling electronic wail that overrides every station, every stream, every smart speaker and cheap battery radio in range. The same tone that television viewers once heard during minor storm warnings and shrugged off. It is not minor now. In our studio, I stop speaking. The script in front of me might as well be blank. The only words that matter are the ones the system is about to inject. The tone ends. A flat, mechanical voice, the kind we use when we want to sound neutral, cuts in. This is the National Emergency Alert System. This message has been issued by the Office of Civil Defense and the Strategic Command Authority. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. At 21:36 Greenwich Mean Time, early warning networks detected multiple ballistic missile launches from hostile territories. Impacts on Allied targets have been confirmed. Preliminary reports indicate at least one high-yield nuclear detonation in a major urban area. Further attacks are possible. All citizens are instructed to seek immediate shelter. If you are in or near a metropolitan area, proceed at once to the lowest, most central part of your building. Basements and underground facilities provide the best protection. Stay away from windows and exterior walls. If you are outside and no shelter is immediately available, lie flat in a ditch or low area, cover your head, and avoid looking directly at any bright flash. Do not attempt to travel by road. Do not attempt to return to your home if you are already in a secure building. Do not use telephones except for life-threatening emergencies. Further instructions will follow as conditions permit. This message will repeat. Then it repeats. In apartments, in cars, in bars, in hospitals, in factories, in little stores where someone has left a radio on behind the counter. Wherever there is a device capable of making sound, that flat voice reaches out and says the same thing. This is not a test. In our studio, the system drops back out and hands control to us again. Not all stations have live humans when this happens. We do, for the moment. The producer stares at me, eyes wide, head tilted slightly as if to say, now it's you. The teleprompter is dead. The carefully prepared, if this ever happens scripts are somewhere on a server that just rebooted and is now throwing error messages. All that's left is the microphone, my voice, and the fact that I, too, have just been told missiles are in the air. I take a breath that feels like inhaling sand. This is Central News Now. I say, falling back on habit. You have just heard an emergency alert. I will repeat and expand the most important parts in plain language. Even now, even in this imaginary night, training takes over. I translate the machine instructions into human ones. If you are in a city and you are not yet in a sheltered place, you must move now. Do not wait. Do not stand at windows to see if anyone else is moving. Go. You are looking for concrete, brick, earth. The more material between you and the outside, the better. If you live in an apartment building with underground parking, go there, toward the center. If you live in a house with a basement, go there. If you have no basement, Go to a hallway or bathroom with no windows, near the center of the structure. Take water if your hand can close around the container on the way. Take a flashlight if it is on the shelf next to the door. Take your children, your parents, your neighbor who never pays attention to the news. Do not take time to pack a suitcase. Do not take time to scroll for more information. You will not know, in this moment, whether your specific city is targeted. You will be tempted to believe that because you do not know that it is, you can keep pretending it is not. Treat the lack of information as a reason to move, not to stay. As I speak, in this story, I picture the people listening. A woman in a small apartment like the one I mentioned in part 1, standing in her kitchen with a mug in her hand, realizing it is now just extra weight. She sets it down, sloshing cold coffee onto the counter, and calls her children by name in a voice that does not sound like her own. A bus driver halfway through his route, frozen at a red light, as every phone on the bus lights up with the same alert. His control radio crackles with half-shouted instructions. Keep calm, keep driving if safe, bring people as close to their homes as possible, do not abandon the vehicle in the middle of the road. He glances at the families on board and makes a small choice. He will finish the route, then find a shelter of his own, even if it means less time for him. A cashier in a 24-hour grocery store who watches the line at the register dissolve instantly as people drop what they were buying and hurry toward the exit or further in toward the storage room, depending on how seriously they take the voice on the speaker. A man in a high-rise downtown office who has been working late, staring at spreadsheets, thinking the headlines do not really concern him, who now finds himself in a stairwell with dozens of others as the building's loudspeakers repeat a tailored version of the same message. From the listener's side, my voice, the machine's voice, and the different local voices blend into something like a single command. Get inside. Get low. Stay. In our studio, we are doing the same. Our building has a designated shelter. The lowest floor, interior rooms, no windows, concrete walls. The kind of place you go for tornado drills and forget about afterward. Except tonight, no one is forgetting. Between segments, our engineer has already started moving equipment into the backup room 2 floors down. Portable consoles, old analog transmitters, a coil of coaxial cable that looks like a sleeping black snake, a wheeled rack of batteries that took 3 people to nudge into the elevator. We are trying to move the heart of the broadcast closer to the building's spine. We are going to stay with you as long as we can. I say, not entirely sure how long that will be. If this signal goes silent without warning, do not assume the worst where you are. Assume only that we had to move, or that the power that runs these wires finally failed. Your job is the same either way. Stay sheltered, wait for the first danger to pass, then help whoever is with you do the same. I start to repeat the basic instructions again. Inside, away from windows, stay down for at least half an hour after any flash, when it happens. The flash. You do not see it if you are in the basement. You feel it. A change in the air pressure, as if the wind itself just tried to reverse. A deep, low thud that is less a sound and more a sensation, like someone dropped a mountain onto a drum many miles away. In our bunker, the lights stutter. For a second, the studio is plunged into dark so complete that I hear someone gasp. The emergency lights snap on, painting everything in a dull red that makes the consoles look like they are bleeding. The engineer mutters, EMP, had to be, and taps the generator status panel with 2 fingers as if it is a stubborn animal. The little green bar holds. The red one stays below the danger mark. We are far enough from any explosion that our building still stands, that our power lines are wounded but not severed. Somewhere else, in the city that did take the direct hit, there are no panels left to watch. I keep talking because silence, in that moment, would be worse than anything I can say. If you felt that where you are, I tell the unseen listeners, you are on the edge of something very few people have lived through. Do not go to the window. Do not go to the door. The first blast is not the end. Secondary shocks, falling debris, and, later, fallout are the next waves. Stay where you are. Check the people near you. Breathe slow. In the days and weeks after this fictional night, those of us who live long enough will hear more detailed accounts from the places that were hit. We will hear about a woman in a downtown office who disobeyed the school drill instinct that told her to stand and stare, who instead dove under her desk as the windows shattered inward, sending shards like horizontal rain across the room. We will hear about a subway train between stations, lights flickering, coming to a sudden, grinding halt as pressure rolled through the tunnels and dust poured from hairline cracks in the ceiling. We will hear about a hospital where the power died, then came back on, then died again, where surgeons held tiny headlamps over operating tables while the ground shuddered, and alarms that were not meant for this kind of emergency screamed meaningless codes. We will hear about basements and parking garages and storm drains, all suddenly repurposed as the difference between burned and unburned, between looking at the blast and never knowing exactly how it looked. But on this night, in the first hours, there are no coherent stories yet. There are only sounds. Some we hear directly, sirens rising and falling over static on the emergency channels, distant booms that may be gas lines or transformers or something worse, the hiss of rain that might not be rain. Some we only imagine. For a while, information becomes narrower instead of wider. The global view fractures. On our end, we lose contact with an entire chain of sister stations east of us. Their carrier signals vanish mid-sentence. A satellite feed that used to carry international news becomes a field of gray noise. Our producer scrawls a list on a whiteboard at the edge of the room. Missing, silent, unknown. The list gets longer. On your end, if you are one of the imagined listeners in this world, your view shrinks as well. From world events to city. From city to block. From block to room. If you are in a basement laundry room with your neighbors, as one of our later callers will describe, your universe becomes concrete walls, a spinning dryer someone forgot to turn off, the soft whimpering of a child who does not understand why everyone is sitting on the floor. No one knows it yet, but the first wave is over quickly. The missiles have either hit, missed, or been intercepted. The detonations that define the shape of the war in military terms have already happened. What remains is everything else. Radiation, fire, shock waves that travel around the world in the air and in the ground. And, spread more quietly, a different kind of wave. What now? As a broadcaster in this scenario, I cannot tell you whether your city is on a list. I can tell you what our instruments see, because that is the only honest thing I have left. We have lost contact with several major metropolitan areas. I tell you, satellite imagery shows large heat signatures where they used to be and no electric light. We will not name them yet until we have confirmation. Naming is a kind of death in itself, and there has been enough of that in the last hour. I can tell you that where we are, the air above the city is still cold and the ground beneath us is still holding. Our connection to the National Emergency Network is degraded but functional. That suggests that, for now, this region has not been directly targeted. If you are in range of my voice, that does not guarantee your safety. It does mean you are not at the center of the first ring of fire. I then do something that, in normal broadcasts, we never do in breaking news. I slow down. I repeat. I give the same simple instructions again and again in slightly different words. Not to fill time. To fill the space that panic would otherwise expand into. In between repetitions, while we are still on generator power and our computer systems are limping along, we start to receive messages. Not polished reports. Not official statements. Voicemail fragments from emergency apps before the cell networks died. Shortwave transmissions from amateur radio enthusiasts who were faster than anyone at getting to their sets. Recorded notes uploaded to servers that managed one last handshake before they went offline. In a conventional show, we would clip these and play the audio directly. Tonight, to keep this as one voice, I read them. I become the conductor of a choir of fear and resilience. From a listener in a suburban neighborhood west of a major city, I say, I scanning a hastily printed transcript. We have this. We are in the underground parking of our building. There must be 80 of us down here. People are sitting on the hoods of cars, on the oil-stained concrete, holding flashlights like candles. The power went out about 5 minutes after the big flash. We felt a rumble, like distant thunder, and dust came from the ceiling, but the structure seems okay. Someone started to pray out loud. Someone else yelled at them to be quiet. The building manager is trying to organize people by floor, taking names, telling us we will check for damage in the morning. I brought my battery radio. It's the only reason we know there are other cities involved. I'm writing this by flashlight on the back of a parking ticket. If this somehow reaches the station, please keep talking. Your voice is the only thing that feels normal right now. I finish reading and look up at the red on-air light, at the little meter that jumps with each syllable. Message received. I say softly, speaking both to the writer in the story and to you listening to this fiction. We will keep talking as long as there is breath and power. Another transcript is handed to me. This one from a teacher, the same history teacher I told you about before the first alert, now in a different role. From a small city away from any known targets. I am downstairs in the school cafeteria with 200 students and 12 staff. The sirens went off during last period. We moved them down here as we practiced in drills. Only this time no one rolled their eyes. They are sitting at the tables now, huddled in groups, some trying to joke, some crying quietly. The vice principal is going room to room with a flashlight, checking that no one is left upstairs. We have no windows here. We didn't see any flashes. We have only the radio, telling us that somewhere else, the worst has happened. The children keep asking, is it coming here? I keep saying, we're doing everything we can to be safe. It's not an answer and they know it. I thought teaching about the Cold War would be the scariest that classroom ever felt. I was wrong. If anyone hears this at the station, when you speak, assume there are children listening. Not because you should sugarcoat it, because they are going to remember the tone of your voice long after they forget the words. I let that one sit for a moment. It is a reminder, inside the story and outside it, that broadcasts are not just information. They are temperature. We receive a note from a retired missile technician in a rural area who writes, with grim irony, that he recognizes the pattern of alerts, the escalation, the language. He describes sitting under concrete decades ago, drilling for a moment like this, never expecting to see it arrive over his own house. He says he has gone down into his storm cellar with his wife, his old service revolver, and a radio. He does not know which he is more afraid of needing. I am not going to read his whole letter on air, I tell you, because some of his fears will not help you where you are. But I will tell you the line that struck me most. He writes, "We built a world where the most important decisions could be made faster than the human mind can process their consequences. Now the rest of us are waiting in slow motion for those consequences to trickle down as smoke and silence." That is the gap we are in. Smoke and silence. Depending on where you are in this fictional landscape, you may see one or the other. If you are in a countryside with no obvious targets nearby, you might step outside after an hour in the basement and see nothing unusual, except perhaps a strange glow on the horizon and a thin layer of dust settling on the leaves. If you are in a city that took a glancing blow, you may hear sirens and shouting and the distant crackle of fires, but still see your own street intact. If you are in a city that took the center of the blast, you are not listening to this. You are beyond the reach of storytelling. For those still within range of my voice, the first night passes slowly. We stay on the air, not with breaking news every minute. There is only so much that can break, but with repetition, with simple instructions, with occasional updates from civil defense. We tell you when the winds are shifting. We tell you which areas are being advised to seal their houses more tightly due to fallout. We tell you that if dust begins to drift down like dirty snow, you should not brush it off with your bare hands. We tell you how long to boil water once you have some. It is, in many ways, the same advice you would hear after a volcanic eruption, a chemical spill, an industrial accident. The difference is context. The difference is knowing that the ash on your windows is not from a malfunctioning plant or a mountain losing its temper, but from someone, somewhere, entering codes into a device with the deliberate intention of burning a city until the dust rose into the upper atmosphere. In part 1, I asked you to imagine where you would go and who you would go with if you heard a siren. In this part, I am asking you to imagine how you would behave, what choices you would make, once you were there. Would you share the last bottle of clean water with the stranger who stumbled in at the last moment? Would you give up the corner spot you staked out in the stairwell to an older neighbor who cannot climb as easily? Would you argue about who is to blame for the war while the dust is still settling? Or would you hold your tongue until everyone is warm and fed? I cannot answer those questions for you. In this story, different characters answer them in different ways. A grocery store manager in a town on the edge of one of the blast zones decides to unlock the walk-in freezer and let people take what they can carry, but only after making them line up and document what they are taking in a notebook. A bus driver finishes his route, pulls the bus into the depot, and then uses it as a shelter for people who have nowhere else to go, rather than leaving it empty. A teenager in an apartment basement uses sidewalk chalk to draw bright flowers on the concrete floor so the younger children have something to look at besides bare walls. These are small acts in the shadow of enormous destruction. Yet when you zoom in on any human life, it is always small acts that fill the frame. Outside the bunkers, the war planners are still playing their deadly game. Second waves, third waves, ultimatums, ceasefire offers, betrayals. Those will matter in the long view. But on the first night, and the day that follows, what matters most to the people who survive is whether the door they chose to shelter behind was opened or closed, whether the person next to them shared a blanket or hoarded it, whether the voice on the radio sounded like someone who remembered they were talking to human beings, not to casualty projections. That is where I will leave you at the end of part 2. In this imagined world, dawn is approaching over a landscape that is no longer the same. Some cities will not see that dawn. Some will see it through a haze of smoke and dust. Some will see it looking almost normal, with only a slight dimming of the light, a slight metallic tang to the air, a faint sense that something is wrong beyond what any one pair of eyes can perceive. Down in the shelters, people will be waking up stiff and sore, wondering whether it is safe to go upstairs, whether they will still have jobs, homes, schools, wondering whether the government whose alerts drove them into those basements still exists in any meaningful sense. In our studio, or what remains of it, we will still be at the microphone, turning our broadcast from breaking news into something else, into a guide, into a map that covers less and less physical territory and more emotional terrain. In part 3, we will move beyond this first night. We will talk about fallout and winter and the slow, grinding realization that whatever the leaders eventually decide and sign in distant bunkers, the world has already changed for everyone else. We will talk about what it means to be alive in a time when the global systems you grew up trusting have cracked, and the only systems you can rely on are the ones within a few miles of where you stand. For now, as you step back out of this imagined bunker and into your real, intact world, keep hold of 2 truths at once. The nightmare I have described is not happening to you. And the way you act in small emergencies, in small conflicts, in small moments of fear and choice, is a rehearsal for how you would act in bigger ones. You do not need a mushroom cloud to practice being the person who knocks on a neighbor's door, who moves inward instead of upward, who shares instead of hoards. You have countless chances, every day, in quieter ways. Take some of them. I am Daniel Hart. This has been part 2 of our long night on Nuclear Apocalypse Radio, a story told so we do not have to live it. We will pick up the thread again as the dust begins to fall and the world tries, battered and blinking, to decide what comes after. Good evening. Before I say anything else, I have to remind you, and myself, of something simple. This is still a story. No bombs have fallen on your real city because of anything I am about to say. No fallout is drifting past your window. You are safe. You are listening to an imagined broadcast from an imagined war, a rehearsal for a night that I hope never comes. But inside this story, the night has passed. I am still Daniel Hart, still sitting in a room lined with cables and tired people and humming machines, still talking into a microphone that has become less a piece of equipment and more a lifeline. Outside, in the world we are imagining together, it is morning. Not the kind of morning anyone was prepared for. There is no traffic report, no cheerful weather banter, no recap of sports scores. A dose that could seriously injure you if you walk through it today might be survivable if you walk through the same patch 2 days from now. Think of it as rain, except you cannot see it and it does not feel wet. You would not walk out into a burning building just to make sure your couch is still there. Treat the air outside certain zones the same way, at least for a while. In some places, people ignore this advice. Of course they do. Stories that portray entire populations as obedient chess pieces are lying. Human beings are stubborn, frightened, proud, desperate. They go where their hearts pull them, even when their heads, or their radios, say otherwise. So in our fictional city not far from where we broadcast, a man decides the warnings are exaggerated. He has a small shop a few blocks from a downtown area that took heavy damage but not a direct hit. He tells himself he needs to protect it from looters. He pulls a mask over his face, an ordinary cloth one left over from an old pandemic, and steps outside. The sky looks wrong. The light is flat, the color of old steel. A fine dust sifts down, gathering in the cracks of the sidewalk, on parked cars, on his shoulders. He walks anyway. Hours later, coughing, eyes watering, he will stumble back into his building, brushing his jacket off with bare hands, tracking dust through the stairwell. He will not connect the intense nausea that hits him that night with the walk. He will think he is simply shaken. By the time someone points out the Geiger counter's frantic clicking near his clothes, the contamination will already be everywhere they have touched. Multiply that one man by hundreds, by thousands, in dozens of cities and towns. You begin to see why every old civil defense pamphlet hammered the same point: stay put. You also begin to understand why, in this story, people like me on the radio become strangely important. We cannot stop the particles in the air. We cannot roll back the blast wave. We cannot order governments to stand down. We can remind you, again and again, of the one power you still have: the choice not to make it worse for yourself and for the people around you. The first few days after the blasts are not cinematic, no matter what old films and games taught you to expect. There are no constant fireballs on the horizon, no endless lines of tanks on the highways. There is, instead, a pervasive heaviness. The power grid is fractured. In some areas, lights snap back on after a few minutes, or an hour, or a day, as emergency systems reroute around damaged lines. In others, they stay off, perhaps forever. Water pressure drops in certain neighborhoods as mains crack, as pumps fail without electricity, as treatment plants shut down to avoid sending contaminated water into pipes. Communication is patchy. Old landlines, where they still exist, sometimes work better than sleek new cell towers, which were never designed to shrug off electromagnetic pulses. Shortwave radio, the tool of hobbyists and small-time broadcasters, becomes the nervous system of the continent. We have a shortwave rig in our bunker. We start using it constantly. Even as our main signal goes out over whatever remains of the conventional network, we listen on shortwave for voices calling into the static. Some are desperate. Some are organized. All are proof that in dozens of pockets across the map, people climbed out of their basements, looked at the changed sky, and decided, we should turn the radio on. In part 2, I told you about messages from a parking garage, a school cafeteria, a storm cellar. Now, in this longer, slower phase, the messages change tone. Not less fearful exactly, more practical. I read that aloud and feel, in the cramped bunker, a subtle shift. We are not going to be able to broadcast lists of supplies from every store, every pharmacy, every farm. We can broadcast models, examples. Stories like that become templates other places can copy, stripped of names and specifics. In another message, a small-town mayor describes turning the high school into a shelter not just for the local homeless population, but for anyone whose home was damaged or whose water ran brown. He talks about splitting the gym floor into sections, families here, elders there, single people in another room, using the cafeteria to serve simple meals from whatever food they could gather from restaurants and homes before it spoiled. He does not dwell on the fear. He dwells on the clipboard in his hand, the way it feels heavier than any ceremonial ribbon-cutting scissors he ever held. In the first town hall meeting after the blasts, he writes, someone asked when the federal government was going to send troops to secure the streets and aid packages to feed everyone. I had to tell them the truth. I don't know. I could say we're on a list somewhere, that someone in a bunker is looking at a map with a circle around us. But I can't promise that. What I can promise is that we will do what we can for each other right now. That answer didn't make anyone cheer. But they didn't riot, either. They nodded. They picked up chairs. They asked where they could sign up to help. Maybe that's all leadership is now. Being the person who says, I don't know when help is coming. Let's start anyway. I read his words into the microphone and know, as I do, that in some basements and barns and metro tunnels, people are thinking, we don't have a mayor down here. We don't have a chief. We just have us. To them, I say, then one of you is going to have to be the person who picks up the clipboard. Not forever. Not as a dictator. Just long enough to write the first list. Who has what skills? Who has what needs? Who can watch at night and who needs to sleep? If you don't choose someone, the job defaults to whoever yells the loudest. You have seen where that leads in peacetime. It leads there even faster in crisis. In the metro of a faraway capital that lost part of its surface to fire, a man named Leo, whom I mentioned in part 2, sends another note from beneath the city. He says they have turned the station into a village. There are rules now. Quiet hours, cleanliness duties, assignments for going up to the surface in protective gear to scavenge. A council of 7 who decide disputes and ration shares. We are living in a tube under a wounded city, he writes. But sometimes, when I sit at the top of the escalator and look down at all the little clusters of people playing cards, reading, tending to a wounded ankle, teaching children to read with a battered old book, I think, this is what a town square looks like now. We used to ignore each other on the metro. Now we know each other's stories. It took the end of the world to make us act like neighbors. I do not romanticize his situation on the air. I read his words, then add, do not mistake this for some kind of silver lining. No apocalypse is worth the cost of learning to value your neighbors. You could have done that yesterday, but if you didn't, and you're doing it now, that matters. It means this is not just a catastrophe. It is also a turning. You might think that, as the broadcaster in this scenario, I would have access to clear answers about the big picture. Often, I don't. Our connection to whatever remains of national government is intermittent. Sometimes we receive structured advisories, the acting president announcing an official ceasefire, or a general describing new guidelines for avoiding contaminated zones. Sometimes we hear nothing for hours and have to rely on the same shortwave chatter everyone else does. When the acting president, Nathaniel Cross, who stepped into power from a bunker when the Capitol went dark, does manage to push a message through, it sounds different from the confident speeches of peacetime. His voice is hoarse, stripped of ornament. He does not promise quick victory. He does not tell people to go back to shopping. He tells them, bluntly, that the federal government is injured, that national supply chains are broken, that local and state leaders, where they exist, will have more practical power in the coming months than any signature on a paper hundreds of miles away. I translate his speech into simpler terms for our listeners, then add, whatever flag you live under in this story, one thing is true. The distance between you and the people who make the biggest decisions has never felt wider. The distance between you and the people who make the decisions that shape your day-to-day life has never been smaller. That gap is where your attention belongs now. On your building, your block, your town, your shelter. Outside, in the fictional world's colder, dimmer daylight, something subtle is changing. Not just in cities and town halls, but in fields. In the north, farmers walk their land and notice, a few weeks after the blasts, that the snow does not melt quite the way it used to, that the ice lingers, that the sun seems weaker even though the calendar says it should be stronger. In the south, people plant seeds and wait for shoots that are slower to emerge. Scientists, those who survived, those whose labs still have power, begin to share early models on the same shortwave bands we now treat as our constant companions. They talk about soot in the upper atmosphere, about reduced sunlight, about the possibility of a nuclear autumn, or worse, a nuclear winter, if enough material reached high enough and stays there long enough. These are long-term problems. When your main concerns are, is this water safe to drink? And will anyone come to help us fight this fire? It is hard to care about whether the average global temperature will drop by 2 degrees over the next year. But some people are already thinking ahead. A small farming cooperative sends a transmission describing how they are building makeshift greenhouses out of scrap wood and clear plastic. Even if the sky stays dim, they say, we can trap a little more warmth, protect the plants from contaminated rain, and maybe get one more harvest than we would otherwise. A group of former university students in a town with a damaged library call in to say they have started an archive in a church basement. They are gathering textbooks, manuals, any printed materials they can salvage, afraid that the digital cloud that once held so much could disperse like the literal one now shading the earth. We do not know who will need this information, they say, but someday, someone will be very grateful we didn't let it mold. I find myself, in this imaginary broadcast, spending more and more time reading out these stories of adaptation and less time reciting casualty estimates. It is not because the casualties stop. They don't. Even after the last bomb falls, people die. From radiation sickness because they went out too early or were too close when the blast happened. From infections because hospitals are overwhelmed or destroyed. From cold because the power grid cannot keep up with a winter that came sooner and bit harder than anyone expected. From violence. In some places, where law enforcement has collapsed and fear turns feral. We do not ignore this. I mention it plainly, but I refuse, in this script we are constructing together, to make horror the only thing we look at. There is enough of that in any disaster movie or worst-case simulation. What those rarely show is the long, boring, necessary work of staying alive together. That is the work you will be doing if you are a character in this world. That is the work the man in the storm cellar with the old service revolver and the radio will have to turn his hand to. If he decides not to point that revolver at himself, he will have to plant, patch, teach, repair, forgive. That last one might be the hardest. For now, in this phase of the story, most people are not ready to forgive anyone. They are still making lists in their heads of who to blame. The other country, their own leaders, their former neighbors who panicked and grabbed more than their share, the scientists who built the weapons, the corporations that lobbied for policies that made escalation easier, the broadcasters who, in the months leading up to the war, treated it as content more than as warning. I know, as I speak into the microphone in this made-up bunker, that if this were real, my face might be on some of those mental wanted posters. You told us to stay calm when we should have been afraid, someone would say. You treated saber rattling like a spectacle. You made graphics packages for Crisis in X and Showdown in Y like it was entertainment. They would not be entirely wrong. In this story, I am trying to make up for that. It is late for apologies, but not too late for usefulness. As this part of our long tale draws toward its close, I want you, listening in your intact world, to hold two images side by side. In one, a city skyline broken and dark, a column of ash rising where a landmark once stood. In the other, a cramped room lit by candles and battery lanterns, where a handful of people sit around a table covered in paper and food wrappers, arguing over how many liters of water each person gets per day and who goes on watch tonight. The first image is dramatic. The second is mundane. They are both the same story. If you ever find yourself in a room like that second one, not because of war necessarily, but because of flood, fire, blackout, any disruption, remember that you are living in the part of the story that most narratives skip, and what you do there matters more than any shot of the skyline. I will end part 3 with a simple refrain, one that is threaded through this entire imagined broadcast and will continue into the final part. You do not control the big levers. You never did. You can influence them, in calmer times, with your vote, your voice, your choices. But in the thick of an emergency, they are far from your hand. What you do control are the small levers. The door you open or close. The food you share or hoard. The calm you practice or abandon. The plan you make or decide to leave for someone else to improvise. In our story, the first wave of the nuclear apocalypse has passed. The second wave, fallout, winter, hunger, grief, is rolling in. People are beginning to understand that this is not a single night to be survived, but a new era to be navigated. In part 4, we will move further into that era. We will look at what it means to rebuild in the shadow of weapons that can never be uninvented, to raise children who know the world ended once and might again, to keep some flicker of humanity alive when the easiest answers are anger and despair. For tonight, in the safe world where you hear all this as fiction, take it as an invitation, not to dwell in fear, to practice attention, to notice, in your daily life, where the small levers are, to notice, in every minor crisis, who becomes the person with the clipboard, who hoards, who helps, who hides. We are all rehearsing all the time, whether we know it or not. You might as well choose your role before the sirens ever sound. I am still Daniel Hart. This is still Nuclear Apocalypse Radio, a story told so that we might, if we are lucky and wise, keep it in the realm of imagination forever. Good evening. One more time, before we walk back into that broken world together, I need to say the thing I have said at the start of every part. This is fiction. There has been no nuclear war while you listened. No cities were hit. No fallout is drifting over your neighborhood because of these words. You are safe. You are listening to a story, a long, dark, hopefully useful story. Inside that story, though, time has moved on. I am still Daniel Hart. I am still sitting in front of a microphone that has seen more fear than most people ever will. I am still speaking from a room buried in concrete, though it does not look quite the same as when we began. Some of the equipment is gone, scavenged for parts, or moved into other rooms. Some of the people are gone, too, taken by sickness, by accidents, by the quiet attrition of a long emergency. New faces have appeared in their place. A teenage volunteer who wandered in looking for a dry place to sleep and now knows more about transmitters than I do. A retired teacher who comes down once a day to help sort messages, then goes back up to the community kitchen that has taken over our old lobby. The calendar tacked to the wall above the engineer's desk is not the same one we had on day 0. We have crossed seasons. In the fictional world we have been following, it has been a little over a year since the first flashes. You can hear it in the way people speak when they call in. There is less raw panic in their voices now, more tiredness, more matter-of-factness. The war, that word that filled every headline at first, has become background to the work of staying alive. The shooting part, the part with missiles and alerts and maps with dotted arcs, lasted weeks. The consequences have lasted much longer. Let me tell you what the world looks like now, or at least the slice of it that our little broadcast still touches. The sky is different. Not every day. There are mornings when the sun rises clean, blue and sharp, and for a moment you could pretend nothing happened. But too many days it looks gauzy, filtered, as if you were seeing it through a tinted window. Scientists, the ones who still have labs and power, tell us that soot from the fires reached high into the atmosphere, reflecting some of the sunlight back into space. Not enough to turn noon into midnight, but enough to nudge the temperature down, enough to stretch winter longer and compress growing seasons. We feel that in our bones. The last winter, in this story, was harder than most. Snow fell early and stayed late. Rivers froze faster, and some never quite thawed to their old width before cold returned again. People who thought they had enough fuel didn't. People who thought one extra blanket would do discovered they needed two. The power grid is not what it was. Some regions have managed to rebuild pieces of it. Cities that were spared direct hits and had functioning governments poured resources into patching lines, replacing blown transformers, rerouting power around dead zones. In other places, the grid is gone for good. Wooden poles leaning at odd angles along empty highways. Substations rusting in silence. People who used to curse at a 4-hour outage now organize their lives around the 1 hour a day their village's jury-rigged microgrid can afford to hum. Our station sits somewhere in between. We have a connection to what remains of the bigger grid, but we do not trust it. We learned early that putting all our faith in distant wires is a recipe for midnight panic. So we built our own redundancies. Solar panels on the roof, scratched, mismatched, some pulled from abandoned warehouses. A small wind turbine lashed to the old relay mast. An exercise bike in the corner that we can hook into a trickle charger if things get truly desperate. We joke that if everything else fails, we will broadcast on the power of our own legs and stubbornness. Food has become a full-time job. Before the war, most of the people in the city where our station sits had no idea where their food came from beyond a vague sense of trucks and supermarkets. Now they know the names of the farmers on the outskirts who still have workable soil. They know which rooftops grow which vegetables. They know which old warehouse is now a mushroom farm, which park has been turned into a ragged patchwork of raised beds. There is less meat, less coffee, less of everything that had to cross oceans or border checkpoints. There is more soup, more casseroles compiled from whatever survived in boxes and cans, more conversations about which seeds to save, which crops did better in the dimmer light. Money still exists on paper in some places, numbers in ledgers, credits in local systems. But more often, value passes hand to hand in the form of useful things and useful skills. A sack of grain, a set of tools, the ability to fix a pump or pull a tooth or teach a child to read. The old global markets have not vanished entirely in this fiction. In a few ports, ships still come and go, though there are fewer of them, and they move slower, guided in by harbor lights that flicker instead of blaze. But most people, most days, do not think about distant markets anymore. They think about the next week, the next month, the next winter, and us. The voice on the radio that has become, for some, the closest thing left to a national conversation. We are not the only station, of course. Far from it. Dozens of low-power broadcasters have sprung up in the ruins, some official, most not. A man with a rebuilt transmitter and a generator on his farm, reading weather reports from a hand-drawn map. A group of volunteers in a shattered city broadcasting community announcements from the back room of an old bar. We talk to them when we can, sharing relay schedules, trading audio like old ham operators traded postcards. But in this script, you are hearing only me. One voice, carrying fragments of all the others. The acting president, Nathaniel Cross, is still alive. Or at least, he was the last time an official message reached us. That message came 3 weeks ago, thin and frayed at the edges, carried on a frequency we have learned to check once a day like a heartbeat. His voice is older now, not because so much time has passed, but because of what that time contained. He does not call himself Mr. President anymore. He says, simply, "This is Nathaniel Cross, speaking on behalf of the Emergency Federal Council." That council is not a government in the old sense. It is a handful of surviving officials, military and civilian, connected by bunkers and hardened lines, trying to coordinate what they can. They cannot do much. They can declare certain areas disaster zones and send whatever aid they can cobble together: convoys of fuel, crates of medicine, teams of engineers. They can issue advisories about which rivers are safest to drink from downstream of destroyed industrial sites. They can urge, plead, sometimes order, weapons to remain in silos now that the worst of the exchange is over. But they cannot promise that everyone will be reached. In his latest address, Cross admitted as much. "I am not going to tell you we are rebuilding as fast as we'd like," he said. "I am not going to stand here under a mountain and tell you that next year will look like the years before the war. It won't. What I am going to tell you is that we have not given up on the idea of a country that is more than a collection of fortified towns. We are mapping who is still out there. We are listening. We are trying to connect pockets of stability into corridors. It will take time. It will take patience. It will take more from you, more responsibility, more forgiveness, more grit than any of you ever voted for. But the alternative is accepting that this patchwork of enclaves and armed crossroads and scavenger bands is the final form of our society. I refuse that. I hope you do too." You could hear, even through the static, that he knew some people listening would roll their eyes. Hope is a harder sell now than fear. In our bunker, we played his message 3 times, adding our own commentary between segments, taking questions from the few communities that still had enough power and antenna to call back. "What does it mean," some asked, "to connect pockets of stability? Will we be forced to send our food to other places? Will soldiers arrive and tell us how to govern our shelters? Will we be drafted into some new war we don't even understand?" The honest answer is, we don't know yet. Reconnection is, if Cross and his council manage to send you fuel and medicine and technicians, welcome them. Use what they bring. Ask questions. Hold them accountable where you can. But do not wait to organize yourselves until a man in a distant bunker says the right words. By the time those words reach you, you should already have rules on your walls, names on your rosters, plans for who gets what when the next storm hits. National structure is a scaffolding. Local structure is the foundation. In the metro under the ruined capital across the ocean, Leo writes to say that they have faced their first real test of that foundation. Food has been tight. Too tight. The scavenging runs to the surface have grown more dangerous as supplies thin and as more desperate people roam the burned districts above. Radiation levels, while lower, still spike unpredictably. A misstep, a wrong turn into a still hot zone, can shave months off a person's life. The council under the metro voted to reduce rations. Most people accepted it. A few did not. A small group, angry, hungry, and armed with weapons they'd smuggled down early, tried to take over one of the storage rooms. They barricaded themselves inside, shouting that they were sick of committee decisions and wanted to take care of our own. It could have turned into a massacre. Instead, it turned into something else. The rest of the station gathered in the corridor outside the seized storeroom. Not with rifles, with tools, with pots and pans, with every pair of eyes they could find. They did not rush the door. They waited. They spoke, one at a time, through the barricade. "We built this place together," someone said. "If you hoard the food and shut yourselves in there, you'll live maybe a month longer, and all of us will die sooner. Including you, when you finally have to leave that room. We made rules," someone else said. "You agreed to them. You ate under them. You slept under them. You don't get to throw them away because they stopped benefiting you personally. It took hours. Hunger makes people stubborn. Fear makes them worse. But eventually, one of the men inside opened the door a crack. His voice shook. He said he was tired. Tired of feeling helpless. Tired of waiting for committees to decide whether his kids got full bowls or half. Tired of the feeling that no matter what he did, he couldn't protect his family from a war he didn't start. He didn't apologize. He handed over his weapon handle first. In his letter, Leo writes, "We didn't exile them. We didn't execute them. We put them on the team that manages the storeroom under supervision. If you're going to trust someone with your food, sometimes it's better to pick the people who thought about stealing it and changed their minds, rather than the ones who never admitted they were tempted. Maybe that's naive. Or maybe it's the only way to make sure our little parliament of survivors doesn't turn into nothing but a security state in a hole." I read his account on the air, and I can feel, even now, in this imaginary future, that it lands on ears who needed to hear it. Maybe on a farm community where one family has more than others and is wavering between generosity and fortress mentality. Maybe in a basement where someone is wondering if they should grab the last crate and run before anyone notices. Maybe in the mind of a commander in some half-intact military unit, deciding what to do with a squad that disobeyed orders not out of malice but out of panic. Forgiveness is risk. So is mercy. So is every attempt at rebuilding trust after the sky itself has proven untrustworthy. But without those risks, the only thing left is force. And force alone cannot build a future. The war that broke the world started because leaders lost the ability, or the will, to imagine solutions that did not involve force. If we learn nothing else from this fictional journey, learn this. When the biggest guns have already fired, doubling down on the logic that lit their fuses is suicide. You cannot bomb your way to trust. You can only behave your way there, day after day, in ways that seem too small to matter until you realize they are the only things that ever did. Here in our own city, above the studio, life is slowly knitting itself into new patterns. The lobby of this building, once a sleek reception area with glossy posters for old shows, is now a community common room. The coffee bar is a serving station for soup. The couches are still there, reupholstered with mismatched blankets, filled with people in the evenings who come not for television but for company. On the roof, where satellite dishes used to bristle like metal flowers, there are planters. Rows of black tubs full of soil and whatever will grow in it. Beans, hardy greens, herbs. In the parking lot out back, a small market appears twice a week. Farmers from the outskirts bring produce in old trucks and handcarts. In exchange, they take home batteries, tools, the occasional spare part for a tractor that we managed to barter from another town. Children play in what used to be the newsroom, turning old swivel chairs into spaceships, drawing pictures on whiteboards that once held schedules and ratings charts. Some of those kids were born after the blasts. For them, the word before is a story they hear from tired adults, not a memory. When I am not on air, I sometimes walk through those spaces. People nod when they see me. Some recognize my voice before they recognize my face. "You're the man on the radio," they say. The one who talked when everything went quiet. I never quite know what to say back. I want to tell them that I did it as much for myself as for them. That speaking into the dark was the only way I knew to keep my own mind from fraying. I want to tell them that there were nights when I wanted to turn the microphone off and crawl into a corner and let someone else be the voice. I usually just say, "I'm glad you were listening," and ask how their crops are doing, or if their grandmother is still holding on, or if their little boy is sleeping through the night again. The theater of news, suits, makeup, polished banter is gone. The function remains. To be a mirror, a map, a metronome. To say, "You are not alone," even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Will this last? Will this little island of organized chaos around our station endure for 5 years? 10? Or will some new disaster, another winter, another pandemic, a failure of some critical river or aquifer, turn it into another entry on a long list of places that tried? I don't know. Stories usually end either at the darkest moment or at the first glimmer of brighter days. Real life rarely gives you such clean edges. Here, in this constructed world, I have the luxury of choosing when to fade the signal out. So I am going to end not with the moment of maximum danger. That was the night the sirens wailed and the sky changed, nor with some grand, triumphant resurrection of old nations. I am going to end with something smaller. Another broadcast. Not mine. Yours. Let me paint it for you. In a small town a few hundred miles from our station, a boy, call him Noah, the same child I mentioned earlier, who watched the lights on the hillside and counted how many were left, sits in front of a jury-rigged radio in the corner of a one-room schoolhouse. The schoolhouse used to be a church, or a community hall, or a large living room that someone donated. It does not matter. What matters is that there are children in it, that someone is teaching them, and that in the corner sits a box with dials that can pull voices from the air. Noah's teacher, a woman who lost half her family in the first winter and still shows up every day with a box of chalk and a stack of salvaged exercise books, hands him a slip of paper. "Read it," she says. He looks nervous. He has heard my voice and others on that radio. They seemed powerful, adult. The idea of speaking into the same microphone, of having his words travel beyond the four walls he knows, scares him. But he clears his throat and starts. "This is Noah," he says. "We are in a town in the hills. There are 43 of us here most days. More when people come through. We have a garden. It didn't do great last year, but our neighbor showed us how to cover it with clear plastic when it gets really cold. That helped. We have chickens. One of them is mean. We keep her anyway. We have a library that used to be 3 shelves in the corner, but now it's 6. We have a teacher. She says we are the first generation of the new world. I asked her what that means. She said it means we get to choose which parts of the old world we keep. We voted. We want to keep music. We want to keep stories. We want to keep the nice parts of the machines, like radios and bikes and solar panels, but not the parts that make bombs. We don't know how to do that yet, but we are going to try. If you can hear this, and you are somewhere else, we want you to know we're here. We're still here. Maybe someday we'll meet." He finishes. His teacher smiles. She reaches over, flips a switch, and sends his little broadcast out into the thin, dusty air. On some frequencies, it will dissolve into static before it travels a mile. On others, if the conditions are right, it might skip off the ionosphere and land in a valley 100 miles away, where a farmer taking a break from his field adjusts his dial and hears a small, clear voice say, "We are the first generation of the new world." And because I like symmetry, because I like the idea that voices can find each other in the dark, I am going to imagine that on one of those frequencies, in that bunker under the old station, our rig picks it up too. I am on air when it comes through. We have just finished reading out the week's weather from volunteer observers, a list of new trade caravans, and a notice from the Emergency Council reminding people not to dismantle old hospitals for materials. The engineer taps his headset, then points at me, holding up one finger, one more signal. I nod. We patch Noah's message in. I listen, along with everyone else in our radius, as his uncertain voice stumbles then steadies, as he talks about gardens and chickens and votes about what to keep. When he finishes, there is a long, quiet moment in the studio. Long enough for me to remember the first emergency alert tone. Long enough to remember the nights when I thought no one was listening, when the idea of a next generation felt like a cruel joke. Then I lean toward the microphone. "This is Daniel," I say, "from the city in the lowlands. We hear you, Noah. You are not alone. You are not the only ones trying to choose better this time. We kept the stories for you. We're glad you're keeping them too. Stay warm up there. Take care of your teacher. And if you ever find yourself in our part of the map, there'll be a seat for you in the studio. You can tell the whole world what you decided to keep. It's a sentimental moment. I know that. But after a year of ash and sirens and casualty reports, I think we've earned one. So have you, listening in the safe world where all of this is only sound and imagination. I have taken you through alerts, blasts, fallout, winter, rebuilding. I have asked you to picture basements and tunnels and barns turned into classrooms and town halls. I have given you, through this one voice, the echoes of many. Now, as I reach the end of this last part, I will do something simple. I will sign off, not with the fatal finality of "this is the last broadcast," with the humility of "we'll keep going as long as we can," because that's all any of us can promise in any world, real or imagined. We keep going. We keep talking. We keep listening. We choose, in 1,000 small ways, not to burn what's left. If someday, in the real world, sirens do sound for some reason, storm, fire, accident, anything, I hope a tiny part of what you heard here will come back to you. Not the fear, the preparation, the sense that your choices matter, even when missiles and ministers seem far away. If they never sound, then this will remain what it was always meant to be, a reminder, disguised as a nightmare, that the way we treat each other when the lights are on is practice for how we will treat each other if they ever go out. This is Nuclear Apocalypse Radio. This is Doomsday Radio. This is Survival Broadcast. This is, in the end, Just one tired man in a concrete room, telling anyone who can hear, you are not just survivors of something. You are founders of whatever comes next. Act like it. I am Daniel Hart. For now, and for as long as the transmitters hold, signing off.